Welcome to Nap Trapped, the baby sleep podcast where every tip comes with a why and probably a side of coffee. I am Sally from the Sleep Concierge.
And I'm Bec from the Sleep Centre.
And together we're sleep consultants that believe in making baby sleep solutions make sense. Because when you understand the why behind what's happening, you can tackle any sleep challenge with confidence. And as I'm telling clients on consults every week, confidence is half the battle won.
That's right. Now, don't worry, we're going to keep things super practical, relatable, and sometimes even funny, because if you can't laugh about your baby refusing to nap anywhere aside from your hip facing due south on a precise 45-degree angle, then what can you laugh about?
True. And plus, we're big believers in community over competition. So there is no judgment here, just evidence-based solutions with a side of solidarity. So grab your coffee or wine. We won't judge.
We don't judge.
And no, we do not. We listen and we don't judge. And let's demystify baby sleep together. So today, for the first episode, we wanted to choose a topic that is something that we talk about with our clients. I think it's probably one of the most common things that we are trying to correct for our clients, and it comes up all the time in my baby sleep membership, Snooze Social, which, Bec, you are one of my incredible co-sleep consultant and moderators. And it's all about how to hold on to that third nap for as long as possible, and why sometimes keeping it when it seems unnecessary is actually crucial for better sleep.
That's right. So it takes me straight back actually to the time where my little one was 6 months old and I decided to drop to 2 naps. I was following a book at the time and it was the advice that was given. And looking back now, I can see how sleep slipped a little bit after that. So yes, it's one of those things that, can really throw you into tricky sleep patterns.
Yeah, it happens. It happens all the time. And I think so often the logic is there. And that's exactly why we're talking about this today, because I had a mum come to me with her 6-month-old facing some early rising. And when her baby started waking at 5:30 a.m., she thought quite logically that her baby was getting too much day sleep. So she decided to drop that third nap.
Yeah, just like I did. So let me guess, things got worse instead of better?
Absolutely. Instead of 5:30 a.m. wakes, her baby started waking at 4 a.m. And while her instinct to reduce day sleep wasn't wrong, dropping the nap completely wasn't the answer. So let's go through the scenario. I think with this topic, it's easier sometimes to use a case study. Now, I've changed a couple of details, just once a nurse, always a nurse, a little bit of patient confidentiality, but the gist is the same. All right, so meet Sarah and her 6-month-old son, Oliver. Now, I had sleep trained Oliver a few months prior. It went off without a hitch. He was sleeping like a champion. He had mastered independent sleep. He was taking 2 long naps during the day and a short bridging nap in the late afternoon. And he was going off to sleep, self-settling, sleeping through the night somewhere between 7 and 7:30. Life was good. Oliver was also eating 2 solid meals a day. And Sarah, his mum, was preparing to return to work. So their schedule looked something like a wake between 6:30 and 7 a.m., 2 90-minute naps and a 30-minute nap to get them to a 7 to 7:30 p.m. bed. But then Oliver started waking at 5:30 and, babies don't always follow plans. We all wake a little bit earlier sometimes. But when it was apparent that it wasn't a one-off, Sarah wanted to figure out what was going on. So he was wide awake at 5:30, blowing raspberries, clearly not interested in any more sleep. So the culprit seemed obvious. Too much day sleep, time to transition to 2 naps. And following this logic, Sarah dropped the cat nap and she moved bedtime earlier, somewhere between 6 and 6:30 p.m. to compensate for the lost afternoon nap. But instead of fixing the problem, Oliver started waking even earlier at 4 a.m. And so every morning for over 2 hours, he would cycle between almost falling asleep, wide awake again, blowing raspberries, crying, but never actually going back to sleep. And before I caught up with Sarah again to fix this problem, she had tried everything. She'd even offered an early morning feed. Was he hungry? She tried bringing Oliver into her bed. She's tried to resettle with a sleep training technique. Nothing worked. And with her return to work looming, Sarah was becoming increasingly and understandably anxious about these early wakings becoming a habit. And I think sometimes when you've had a baby that has slept so well, it can be a rude shock and you can start to panic a little bit that you're going back to how it was before. And as I mentioned before, this is probably one of the most common scenarios and age groups that we both work with. The third nap being dropped too early and things going haywire.
I feel like we see the advice everywhere that dropping to 2 naps between 6 and 8 months is the thing to do. What's your take on this?
So first of all, I think with anything we talk about here, there is always a big caveat that every baby is unique. And look, I'm sure there are some 6-month-old babies out there that can drop the third nap and they just rock it. But I think we are aligned in that we actually go against a lot of that advice because we are desperately trying to hold on to that third nap for as long as possible, especially if you're seeing inconsistent naps, as in maybe some days are long naps, some days are short, not every day is looking the same. You've got overtired bedtimes, bedtime battles, multiple overnight wakings, or, as Sarah and Oliver were experiencing, early rising. Bec, you mentioned before that this is what you experience. So when your first baby, and, you know, we often, with subsequent babies, we learn as we go. When you dropped the third nap, what do you remember happening?
Yeah, so when I dropped the third nap with Dexter at 6 months, the major thing that started happening was he would go to bed but then wake after 45 minutes. Right. And then that bedtime, the settle then became quite difficult in order to achieve. So it was relentless. So bedtime would happen, I'd get him down, 45 minutes later, he's boom, awake. And it could take over an hour to settle him back off to sleep. So that was the major impact from the third nap being missed at that point.
Yeah, which a lot of parents would do experience false starts. And you never know, maybe he thought that was the nap and he was ready to party on until a much later bedtime.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess instead of dropping the nap entirely, what should parents do?
So I think that rather than eliminating it, what it's about is we redistribute the baby's sleep totals across the whole 24-hour picture. And what that means is that we cap those first 2 naps, so those really 2 chunky long naps that Oliver was taking, we cap those. So we actively wake him from one of them. We make it shorter to allow room to keep that third nap in play.
Yeah, perfect. And what would typically happen when parents drop this nap too early?
Well, I think just as we've discussed, you can have false starts. You can have a baby that, I mean, to be honest, we kind of see 2 scenarios play out. First, babies end up needing a super early bedtime. So like in this case study, Sarah had tried to combat overtiredness and she'd done the right thing logically, which was, all right, we've got big wake windows. I don't want an overtired baby going to bed, so I'm going to bring bedtime to 6 p.m. And when we're talking about bedtime at 6 p.m, or sometimes it even has to be earlier if your baby's taking shorter naps, it can naturally lead to what we feel like is early rising, but it's not actually. So let's say they go to bed at 6 and they're awake at 5. That's not actually early rising. That baby has just met their overnight sleep max, their quota for overnight sleep totals, and they're awake to start their day. They have done what we have asked them to do, which is sleep through the night, but with the math of overnight sleep, it's landed them at 5 a.m. And then what starts to happen is the first nap of the day comes early because you had to start your day early. The next nap comes early, bedtime stays early, and you get stuck in this cycle of early naps, early bed, early rising. And that's the first scenario we usually see.
Yep. So the second scenario, is that something to do with being overtired when one would go to bed?
Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, chime in if this is something you see as well, but I find that parents try to stretch those wake windows. So they understand, I don't want to put my baby to bed at 6 for the exact reasons we've just talked about. So they stretch that last wake window to try and get into bed at 7 p.m. and then hello cortisol. And
I think everyone's trying to, the 7 p.m. bedtime seems to be the magic number, don't you think?
the 7 p.m.
A lot
bus,
of families,
as some
that's
sleep guides call it.
That's it. So when there is high levels of cortisol, what would a family then expect from their little one?
Well, it happens when there's an overtired baby, and then you get things like big tears at bedtime. If there's one thing we know about overtired babies, is that they have the tendency to cry and cry hard. They may even not cry at bedtime and they just crash and pass out because they are so tired, but they have a difficulty linking sleep cycles because they are just too frazzled. So you may get an increase in overnight wakings, even if you didn't have them pre-existing. You may also have early rising, which is exactly what was starting to happen, I suspect, for Oliver and Sarah. And overtired babies also sometimes suddenly start presenting as if they've got low quality sleep and lower sleep totals. So they have a harder time taking those long chunky naps that you were used to. They start catnapping more, they start crying more, and everything just starts to fall apart a little bit. Bec, what would your solution be in this case?
I'm a big believer in capping naps. So we want to try and find a way to keep the third nap for as long as possible. And so one way to do that is to carefully structure the day. So that would mean capping naps at certain times to make sure that we've got enough time through the day to create a wakeful period that will be sustainable in order to keep that third nap for as long as possible. So a typical routine maybe for a 6-month-old or a 7-month-old might be, say, around 45 minutes in the morning.
Yep.
And then leading into a 90-minute to 2-hour nap in the afternoon. And then that leaves a good chunky wake window in order to be able to keep that quick, like bridging nap in for reaching a more sustainable bedtime. So capping naps for me is how it sort of would work.
Yeah, and look, that's exactly what we did in this scenario, and it worked beautifully. So once you know that a baby is able to take these longer naps, we can have more confidence in, and yes, it goes against the adage of never wake a sleeping baby, but sometimes we have to, because we have to protect the subsequent nap. We have to protect the cat nap, to protect your bedtime, to protect overnight, to protect your early rise, or to protect your later rise, rather. And I find that this actually applies to older babies as well. You know, we do this for 7 and 8-month-old babies. I've even brought in the third nap to try and just reshape even for a 9-month-old baby. And I think we're definitely both in the camp that the longer you can hold on to 3 naps, if you're going to take anything out of this podcast episode, is that the longer you can hold on to 3 naps, the smoother the transition becomes as your baby adjusts to the longer wake windows.
Agreed. I think you get a really good sense of your little one's ability to stay awake for longer periods and become naturally able to do a long wakeful period to get to a 2-nap schedule. Whereas if we force the issue and eliminate the third nap too early, we run into all sorts of issues. So a gradual move away from the third nap rather than just cutting it all together, I think, is going to be beneficial to everybody.
Definitely. And I feel like the truth is that we all only have X amount of sleep totals available to us in the day. You know, I need more sleep than my husband does. My daughter is definitely in the highest sleep total camp than my son, you know, within probably an hour or two in a 24-hour picture. So we've still only got X amount of sleep to work with. It's not about offering less necessary. It's about offering it and saving that sleep pressure sort of as your insurance policy to get that third nap in to protect everyone from overtiredness and to just buy yourself some time until the transition can be smoother. When do you know that it's actually time to drop it? Because I think so often parents have the right idea that something needs to be fixed, and I think it's something to do with the amount of day sleep. How would you know when it's time to drop it?
I think you're looking for a few key signs. So I think, you're working on capping that second nap. I would probably cap the nap. If you're working towards a 7 o'clock bedtime, then capping the nap at around 2:15, in order to create enough time to get the third nap in. So initially a 6-month-old or a 7-month-old might have a 2.5 hour wakeful period between the end of the second nap and taking the third nap. So if their nap is finishing at, say, 2:15, you'll be putting your little one down at, say, 2:45. And that will work for quite some time. And you'll probably have a 30-minute nap at that point, and then bedtime will be, 7:30, around that sort of time frame. As your little one becomes older, their ability to stay awake for longer periods starts to increase. And so you will find that the 2.5 hour mark for nap 3 will start to be resisted. So at that point, you know that you may as well just make the wakeful period 2 hours 45. So naturally your little one is starting to push on their wakeful periods. So if your second nap is finishing at 2:15, your third nap is going to start at 5 o'clock. So the key is to not naturally assume that your little one is ready to drop the nap. It's more of a case that we start to work with their wakeful periods and building on that ability to stay awake for longer. And then essentially what will happen is you might get to, say, a 3-hour wakeful period before you're offering nap 3. And at that point, once that starts being resisted, then you can be quite confident that your little one is now able to do a much longer wakeful period. And you'll be able to sort of move into a 2-nap schedule a little bit more easily because your little one is potentially able to stay awake for the 3.5 hours that we're aiming for between the end of the second nap and bedtime when you're on a 2-nap schedule. So you're looking for a few things. It's a gradual removal, a gradual move away from short wake windows into a longer stretch.
And then what do you tell parents? Because something I often hear is that babies are refusing, particularly babies that are otherwise great self-settlers, independent sleepers in the cot. They refuse it. They put their baby down at the set time that's on the schedule, but their baby fluffs around, doesn't go to sleep. What would you say to families as to how we try and keep that nap in outside of the timing?
The third nap is always pretty tricky to achieve. So you've just got to pull out all the stops, all the things that we would, recommend you're not doing for your first and second naps. We really encourage you to do for third naps. So rocking, holding, padding,
break the rules,
carrier, break all the rules. Like as long as you're not feeding to sleep for that nap, I feel like, all gloves are off. You can get little one down as whatever it takes. So yeah,
and I actually find it's the one that, car, carrier, pram, fitball, bounce, go back to all those sleep crutches that we weaned out. It won't confuse the picture. We're just looking for, sometimes it's even 15 minutes. If it's an older baby, we just need to get you to bedtime without a hot mess express. And I also find that third nap is usually the one that if you have got this great hot sleeper and you have felt like my day is just revolves around me being at home waiting for a baby to wake up, then that's the perfect one to say, okay, we do this on the go. We are going for a drive and then we'll have family dinner and get home for bedtime. Or I've got a toddler, we're going to go for a scoot and baby can fall asleep in the carrier or the pram. Or I'm going to go and walk the dog. I've got cabin fever. I need to get out. Have your other two as the ones that, yes, we're going to really protect the great sleep that we've worked on. Nap 3, anything goes. And I should just say the only reason we don't recommend, and this is a whole other podcast episode in the making, the feeding to sleep for nap 3, despite us saying lay it on thick in terms of how you get your baby to sleep is because we don't want to rob hunger from dinner solids if they're on that, but also their final milk feed before going to bed. We want to be able to make sure we go into the night confidently that this baby has really tanked up with calories and not snacked and taken away from that. But that's just a little side note in case anyone's wondering.
Yeah, that's going to be a good one, that
that's
podcast.
Going to be a good one. That's another one that we're both very passionate about.
Yeah.
Very passionate about. So, I mean, this is kind of just a wham bam first episode, but I feel like the key takeaways here is that if you have a baby sitting somewhere between 6 to 9 months and either sleep has not been so great, and you're looking at more actively sleep training and getting all your ducks in a row and working on getting better sleep, minimizing overnight wakings, tidying everything up, your third nap is critical. Put it back in, keep it, do whatever you need to do. Irish jig from 5 till 5:30 with your baby on your hip at a 45-degree angle facing due south. But not only that, even if you have an otherwise great sleeper, but you are facing a new problem such as, I've got increased overnight wakings, early rising, and I dropped the third nap. The key is to bring it back in, but bring it back in strategically so that your baby hasn't maxed out in all of their sleep totals for the day by 2 p.m. And then you're left with either an early bed or a super overtired wake window, which can snowball pretty quickly. Keep it as your insurance policy against overtiredness. And what that'll allow you to do is actually follow your baby's lead and their natural ability to stay awake longer better. And we love a little bit of parental intuition of following a baby's lead rather than the sleep consultant said I had to do this at this time. We can go with your baby. They play a big part in this.
They do, don't they? They're very good at communicating, and it's a funny thing when you are a sleep consultant that you start seeing all the ways babies communicate without crying or making any kind of audible noises. They can communicate with the schedule that they're presenting to you, and their wakings and so forth through the day and overnight. They are telling us things, and it's quite an interesting concept. And it's quite, I think, being in this industry for quite some time, Sally, you and I, it feels as though we can see our little ones or your little ones talking to us through what they do overnight, and so it becomes quite clear to us in order to communicate that with parents.
Definitely.
So I think it's one of those
the
things.
message is loud and clear at 4 a.m. I think for everyone. But I also think it's worth noting that sometimes parents can feel like adding. So we've dropped the third. They've dropped the third nap, and I'll be the first to say that life on less naps is so good. Like I'm all for the less naps, the more freedom.
Game changer. Yeah.
Game changer. So I totally get the appeal. And I think sometimes when I speak to families and say, okay, we're going to bring the third nap back in, but we're going to cap this and wake here and blah, 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 is that it can feel like a backwards step. Yeah. It's not a failure on you or your intuition, like what you thought was happening or that it didn't work or your baby. It's just one of those things. It's our strategy. And the thing is, it doesn't involve any kind of sleep training technique. And as sleep consultants, I see all the time on social media that sleep consultants are just about sleep training and fervor and cry it out and blah, blah, blah. This requires none of that. If anything, we're saying hold your baby, bounce your baby, walk your baby so that we can reduce crying at 4 a.m. We can actually get you better sleep, hopefully, without a huge amount of sleep training and resettling involved.
Exactly.
And so that's why it's definitely not a regression. Yeah.
Yeah, minimizing tears and working holistically. So if there is a way to get better sleep through making schedule changes, changing into sleep environment, things that it can just mean that you are having to do less sleep training overall. And that's a big, it's a big component of our work, the holistic side of it.
Absolutely. And when you had your next baby, did you keep the third nap for longer?
Oh, yes, the third nap. The third nap stayed until he was at least 8 months. And it
Amazing.
was, like you said, like night and day, just one simple tip can make a world of difference. And I didn't face any of those 45-minute wakings with the second or third baby. So yeah, definitely worthwhile trying to keep it for as long as you can.
Confessions of a sleep consultant, both of mine dropped it at 7.5 months. Do as I say, not as I do.
Don't as I
But we had but I didn't have any sleep issues. But, if you got sleep issues, this is how we're going to fix it. So
yeah, exactly.
I think this has been the perfect first episode of Nap Trapped. I feel like we've kept it kind of to the length of maybe someone's catnapping baby. If you've got this in your ears whilst you're holding a baby or walking a baby or trying to get a nap in, or maybe you're rocking an overtired baby because you've dropped the third nap too early. Now you know tomorrow we're bringing it back in. And look, already from this one case study about the third nap, I can already see so many sleep topics that we need to dive into and that we will dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface in terms of topics that we can cover. I know all of our listeners probably have so many questions about the third nap and ideal bedtimes and, what we're all about. So, I feel like we're looking forward to the comments and the questions that come along with this episode.
Definitely. And one of the episodes that we'll definitely do, because again, passion of ours, is early rising. So don't worry, we have discussed it briefly here in terms of the third nap, but we will do a whole episode on early rising and figuring out those morning wake ups and, the list goes on. We could scratch the surface and talk for hours. And so it looks like we're going to be very busy in these coming episodes and probably drinking a lot more coffee.
So much coffee. But I can't wait to unpack all of these topics with you, Sal.
Likewise. So until next time, remember, you are all doing a wonderful job, even if you are currently trapped under a napping baby.
You've been nap trapped.
We'll work on that outro.
Are we supposed to say that together?
Should we do it together?
Here we go.
Ready, set,
go. 3, 2, 1.
Whoa. You've been
nap trapped.
All right. We're out.